So if you're following along in your student workbook, we'll be starting on page 19. And there's a little bit of pre-work that we'll review or we'll come back to as we kind of move through this lesson or this session. If you are following along on Facebook, be sure to hit a like or give a comment and say hi. We always like when people have a little bit of interaction there. And I guess the other aspect of this course is you don't have to share any numbers, any details, any of that. If you do have specific questions, I could put you in contact with somebody who could, be kind of an expert for whatever question you might have, or point you in a direction where you might get more help with that. And all that being said, this is pretty foundational. What does God say about the blessings that he gives, and how does God help us with his word based on the blessings that he gives? All right, so session 1 is entitled Fix Your Eyes on Lasting Treasure. And we've got some financial categories. And if you were to, maybe we'll rewind. Yeah, that's fine. If you could find a short word or phrase to describe the financial picture that people face today, what might you say? This kind of struck me just the other day. I was driving on Airport Highway back from the airport area back here toward Kroger and back to church. And there's this gigantic billboard. Most of them are gigantic, obviously, but it's out by Eber Road, somewhere in there, and advertising for the lottery. And this, it's $25,000. That's the very first thing you see on this billboard, $25,000. And the second thing that jumps out on that billboard is pay your bills. And that, in my experience, is a little bit different from the way the lotteries have advertised themselves in the past. The lottery of, win the lottery, and then you can go on vacation or buy that special dream home or whatever the case may be. But pay your bills, that was kind of a unique one. When we talk about this page, financial categories. When we talk about, floating, there's actually kind of 4 different areas that we're going to talk about here. First would be drowning, being chased by creditors and falling behind a little bit more each month. Maybe where the bill collector is calling or sending letters in the mail. Treading. And treading water would be kind of the idea of barely holding on. And these are blanks on page 19 in your student workbook. Treading would be barely holding on, like one paycheck from disaster, where if there was a stoppage of work or, something as random as a nationwide shutdown, which is fairly unheard of in our nation's history, but it happened. All of a sudden that one paycheck wasn't there. And made for a big problem. Rolling, using the idea of a kayak, that you're doing fine, you're rolling with the waves, you're doing okay. And then the last one would be flying, like you're well off for now and confident about the future. And if you just take a moment for yourself, looking at these 4 categories, and mentally or in your book, just put a little mark or mentally note, where would you kind of place yourself on the whole continuum from drowning to flying? And maybe you're in between. Maybe you're firmly in one category or firmly in another, or maybe you're making the transition between the two. And then the other part, as long as we're still on talking about financial categories, because a lot of this, especially session 1, gets to the real heart of the matter, our emotional relationship with money, with the money that God gives. And you've got some space there in your workbook. 3 burning questions you would like answered by this course, or 3 questions that have come to mind when it comes to how do you handle finances. And there could be a lot more depth and a number of other experts, I suppose, that would be able to talk about this with a lot more expertise. But there are certain tax advantaged tools that are available. That might be one, talking about taxes. Maybe you're thinking about education, or how do you plan for education? Maybe you're thinking about retirement, or wondering, 401k, 403b, Who knows what the stock market is going to do? Maybe you're a student of history and you and you watch the headlines and you see that our national debt has become 100, like almost 140% of our gross domestic product, which is the highest ratio that has ever been experienced in our nation's history. Those are some of the questions that might be on my mind, and that might be on your mind too. How do we manage these things when it seems like life is as difficult as it is? Feel free to hit pause or let me know if you have any other questions or comments as we go along. Getting to the heart of the matter. Money outcomes, some fallouts. Paul says, people who want to get rich fall into temptation and a trap, and into many foolish and harmful desires that plunge men into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Some people eager for money have wandered from the faith and pierced themselves with many griefs. What are some of the hidden emotions that often accompany life's financial challenges? You could probably think of a few that you have experienced, and it's hidden. A lot of time these emotions are hidden, not so much that they're unknown, but precisely because there's, maybe that first emotion is the emotion of shame. That emotion of feeling like not following through, not measuring up, maybe shame at some of the decisions we've made or haven't made. Maybe there's another hidden emotion such as worry or anxiety. That's definitely there, because for the most part, by and large, we use money for paying our house mortgage or paying the rent and making sure all the other bills are paid. And there's some bad ramifications when that doesn't happen. Some hidden emotions. Maybe there's a little bit of excitement. If there's a particular investment that you feel like you've gotten in on the ground floor of, and that it's done fairly well in the last few weeks or months or something like that, maybe there's some excitement there. And Paul on the screen here talks about two types of situations that negatively impact our finances. First of all, number one is that top passage on the screen about the kinds of evil that enter lives because of the love of money. Because money in and of itself is not a bad thing, but it does bring with it some temptation. Even all the ones that we have on the screen fall into temptation and a trap, and plunge men into ruin and destruction. Love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. And you just peruse some of the headlines and you see that people will do strange things for money, or strange things because of a loss of money. And sometimes that money actually pushes God off of the throne in our hearts and have resulted in even worse pain and suffering. So that's one type of situation, when the love of money kind of supersedes things. And let's see, the fallouts and the driving force, the fallout of this is this desire. That's the main thing that we see, is this desire for more, and the eagerness and the love. You notice all those words of emotion that are highlighted in blue on our screen. People want to get rich, and the love of money, and this eagerness for money. Again, not that money is a bad thing, but keeping things in proper perspective. And this lesson kind of is a little bit like a valley, where we're right at the cusp of the valley, and then we're gonna see the actual pull of the old self in this. Secondly, another type of situation that negatively impacts finances, unexpected, uninvited, and unforeseen guests that may also come to challenge our financial scene. James talks about this. Now listen, you who say, today or tomorrow we will fill in the blank. And then he concludes it, today or tomorrow we will make money. Why? You don't even know what will happen tomorrow. It might be something as mundane as the water heater going out, transmission belt going out. Maybe, your car, have some car trouble or some other car trouble, or maybe it's a windfall. And God's point here is that there are a lot of challenges that may come our way, and we do our best to plan, but at the same time we recognize that we are not in control of the future. Just going to double check to see if we had all right. So just taking a moment to think for yourself, and or if you're watching along with somebody, to take a moment and think about some of the top 5 fallouts that result from an improper focus on money. Top 5 fallouts. That was from the first passage about wanting to get rich, fall into temptation and a trap, and many foolish and harmful desires. And you can go ahead and hit pause if you need another minute or two. We'll just give you about 30, 35 seconds here. What are some of the top 5 fallouts? Just a couple more seconds. Any of the top 5 fallouts that result from an improper focus on money? A couple that came to mind for me was sometimes there's that feeling of dread or despair. Feeling like you don't have the headspace to make the decision that you need to make, that you're kind of rushed into everything or surprised by something. That sense of despair, or maybe a sense of worth, that as though the management or the mismanagement of funds is directly related to your status or your standing as a person, or the kind of the worth that you have. Because a lot of our society, at least internally, we tell ourselves that society has this understanding of worth that is contingent in some way on what we bring or the value we have. And maybe there are different values that people have for some of these things. Maybe another fallout from an improper focus might be crime, or maybe not even crime, but just fudging the numbers just a little bit. Whether it's claiming a little bit more of this or a little bit less of that, and who's really going to find out? It's not that big of a deal, but it makes a person feel better. And then finally, the last one that I had on my sheet, and you might have others to add on your own, is that desperate people sometimes do rash things. That it might, if you're being driven along by this love or this eagerness, or by the lack, then you might do things that you wouldn't normally do, and it just leads to a silly decision, maybe a snap judgment, that or maybe just background stress. That the background stress that you carry is something that kind of comes out in the relationship we have with one another. There's some interesting statistics on the role of total household consumer debt and the rate of divorce. And I guess the take home from that was that if you're into 5 digits of debt, $10,000 or more, then you really need to have your heart and focus even more than otherwise, because you don't want to get so caught up in in the numbers and the money side that you lose out on the blessing of the spouse that God has given to you there. What about the next one? Point B on your sheet. Give you a minute for yourself. Some financially challenging, unexpected guests that you have observed or experienced. An unexpected guest might be totally anonymous example, that you're trimming the hedges on a sunny summer afternoon, and you reach over the hedge trimmer, this electric hedge trimmer, to lift up a branch, and for whatever reason, you've got the hedge trimmer going and you're lifting the branch, and then all of a sudden the hedge trimmer, instead of trimming the hedge, trims your finger a little bit, and you end up in the hospital needing stitches. Wow. Well, that's a little unexpected. Or maybe, you're driving to work and you didn't look both ways, and it's Toledo, so a red light doesn't really mean stop right away. And maybe you got blindsided by the car. That, who knows? And it has an influence and impact on your car, also has an impact on your health and your ability to work and enjoy life over the next few weeks or months. And we know from experience that what James says here is the truth. You who say today or tomorrow we will make money, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow. Who could have predicted a year ago that there would be a virus that would start in China somewhere, and it would bring the world to a standstill? You don't even know what will happen tomorrow. The heart of the problem. The question is, where is your treasure? This is from Matthew chapter 19. Jesus says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." This is page 21 in your workbook. Some of the more common treasures on earth that capture people's hearts. If you are in need of some ideas, then just turn on the television or start scrolling the internet for 20 minutes, and you'll have more than enough between the commercials for what we see, and the advertisements that might even be targeted based on your browsing history. The things that capture people's hearts. Well, maybe it's something as simple as being able to buy more home and move to a different home. Maybe the idea of being able to retire early. Maybe it's a good thing, a blessing, such as children. That children really capture our hearts, and we want to do all that we can for them. But at the same time, that our society really holds up children as the ones that we have to sacrifice for in absolutely everything. And that external pressure that says, if your child doesn't have A, B, or C, or doesn't participate in X, Y, or Z, then does your child really have the childhood that they should have? And Jesus says, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also." Just the other week, I had a friend tell me that, that an acquaintance of theirs, we'll make it as anonymous as possible, had a car loan that was over $500 a month. And I'm like, oh my goodness. But that's not completely uncommon. And it's nice to drive a new car, a clean car, something that's relatively quiet. And it's, if it's 2020, 2021 model year, it might be fresh off the lot and still smell like that new car smell. Those are a lot of the things that we see in these marketing commercials and advertisements. And that really gets us to the heart of the problem, the human factor. This pull of the old self. The old self is a strong inner pull that naturally lives for its own satisfaction. Its cravings for treasures on earth leads us to make the wrong choices. And it generally follows this pattern that we see on the screen, that what we see with our eyes then captures our emotions and directs our energy. That we see, oh, the PlayStation 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, whatever they're on, I think it's 5, is coming out. And wouldn't that be nice? Emotion. Because that's what they're really selling you on. They're selling you on the emotion and the emotional impact of this thing. That they're not selling you a PlayStation, they're selling you the experience of relaxation and time at home. And that ends up directing our energies. Some tricks of materialism or consumerism. This is still page 21. Identify some tricks of materialism and consumerism that attracts our eyes and successfully pulls at our hearts. I think the biggest one out of this, and you might have your own to add. I think the biggest one out of this is the idea that everyone thinks a particular way, or that successful people think and act in a particular way, or have a particular thing. And you want to be successful, don't you? You want to be like that person, don't you? And that the purchase of something, or the change, based on what we see with our eyes and what captures our emotions, that if you just do this and change that and have this and ditch that, then you'll be like one of those. You'll be one of those people with, that they show on all the stock photo advertisements, the smiling family, and it's all well lit and well groomed. It's kind of like that video. I don't know if you saw it. And I think it went viral probably a year and a half ago. It was a video of a man who would drive to all these exotic locations, and he would take a selfie at the edge of the Grand Canyon or some mountain peak or something like that, and he would post it on Facebook about how wonderful it is and how great it is, and then he would walk away, and the visual would just turn almost black and white, and he was just dejected and get into his car. Kind of that idea that the people we present ourselves to be is something that we value very highly. And it would be very easy to follow this pattern of eyes, emotion, and energy, even in the way that we present ourselves, that I need to present myself for the eyes of others, so that my life looks as put together and successful, so that I have that feeling that I am accomplished, and that my energy has been well spent. And that's the pull of the old self. You might think of, and you can feel free to pause if you need a moment to catch up, any other tricks of materialism or consumerism that attract our eyes and successfully pull at our hearts. Maybe another one that comes to mind is that if you purchase a particular product or service, then they will carry out some good initiative. And this is the idea of commercial storytelling, that if you buy a Subaru, then it's not just a car that you're buying into you're helping to save the earth one tree at a time, because for every Subaru sold, then they're going to plant a tree, or maybe plant 10 trees or something like that. And that if you purchase their product, then you are a participant in this greater mission that is bigger than yourself. And there's always a new trick up somebody's sleeve. All right, next one. Oh, some personal emotions and attitudes. Sorry, that was the previous one. Personal emotions or attitudes that lure us into spending. I think in this one of the things that comes up often is this idea of spending or shopping as an escape or as an outlet. It's that favorite day of the year for all of us. Amazon Prime Day was 2 days this year. But the shopping experience, at least before coronavirus, was sold as a way to escape. And you deserve this for all the time and all the effort that you put in. And you just need a moment to pamper yourself with this one product or this one experience of shopping. I think that's some of the emotion. And then if the money wasn't there, or if there is some sort of concern or worry, even if it's not related to money, maybe it's some sort of personal pain or emotional pain, whatever it is. It's so easy to just say, well, it's just this once. I'll just find a little bit of escape in the shopping experience, and I'm going to pamper myself with this one little thing. That might be some of the personal emotion or attitude there. The interesting thing is that that money gives a number of lies. And this is page 22 in your workbook. And it basically makes a lot of the same promises that God makes, except doesn't follow through. That money will give me success or respect or power, happiness, freedom, and security. And you notice that money makes all the same promises as God, except it does not follow through. Because how much money does it take to be successful? Do you need to have as much as Bill Gates or Jeff Bezos or Elon Musk? Do you need to, get paid $30 million for a year of playing basketball like Michael Jordan? Or because there's always somebody with more, money will give me respect or power. And that maybe if I was in a better place, then people would look up to me more, or people would recognize me as somebody who has it all together. And as we're kind of talking about this, you can consider the bottom part of the page as well. Examine for yourself the things of the world that pull especially at your own heart. And if this one is a little bit more difficult for you to think through, then ask your spouse or somebody else that's close to you. And chances are they might see a little bit of a pattern that each of us might not see. And for the reverse is true. Some of the lies continue with that money will buy me happiness. And it is true, and Scripture even speaks this way, that life is a little bit easier when there is a little bit of money involved, or that life is more difficult when there is extreme need. But that money in and of itself does not buy happiness, because Scripture also talks about the more the accumulation, the greater the worry. Next one, that money will give me freedom. This idea that I'll be free to do what I want when I want. I can take a vacation. I can retire early. I'll have the flexibility to go, whatever the case may be. And there's always a little bit of a truth or a partial truth or a half truth in these things, but it doesn't follow through completely. Because with the accumulation, if money is what it is that we're thinking personally will give me these things, then the accumulation of more will simply lead to greater worry about it. And then finally, security. That money will give me security, which is all well and good until that question of how do you preserve that from loss? And this is the place where thieves break in and steal, where moth and rust destroy, and we don't even know what will happen tomorrow. We can't change one hair on our head from brown to gray or back, at least not permanently. This lie that money will give me security, and that finally at some point I will feel I can rest. If you're following along in your workbook at the bottom of page 22, and if you need to pause here, maybe talk with your spouse if you're working through this video together, to examine for yourself the things of this world that especially pull at your heart, and then try to find at least one thing before that, kind of a trigger before that, that really makes it happen. You can feel free to hit pause now. All right, continuing on. This is page 23 in your workbook. We had talked about, page 22, the pull of the old heart. And page 23, the heart of the solution, the God factor. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. That's what Jesus says here. So it's easy to be attracted to the visible treasures of the world, quote unquote, because you can see it, you can count it, you can measure it, you can maybe have some recognition for it. Yet many of these treasures in heaven are unseen. What are the treasures in heaven that are so valuable for us to focus on? And really talking about spiritual blessings here. Because you think of, a lot of times you see that phrase, treasures in heaven, or you hear that phrase, treasures in heaven. We're really talking about spiritual blessings here is what we're really focusing on. So what sort of spiritual blessings do we have that we cannot see? And I think number one on the list would be the forgiveness of sins. And because of the fact that your sin has been forgiven, you have a God who cares for you personally and individually. And the promise of Romans 8, verse 28 applies to you, that it doesn't apply. It's not a general statement to all people that for all people, things are going to turn out well and things are going to turn out to be a blessing. It's a specific statement for Christians that God will use even the goods and the bads, from our perspective, the good things and the bad things in this life, and turn them into a blessing for us, and turn them into an eternal blessing for us. For we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose, specifically for Christians. You also might think of the fact that you don't have to chase, you don't have to find something to fill, as St. Augustine called it, that God-shaped hole in our hearts, that rather that you have a Lord who cares about you, and that nothing else in the world will completely fill that longing, that our hearts are restless until they find their rest in you, is the way he kind of put it. And on top of that you have clear guidance from the Word of God on how do we live our lives, on how do I live as a husband or wife, or a single person, as a parent or child. You have clear word from God about the removal of guilt, that God has taken away, that Jesus has taken away your actual guilt, and that we don't have to struggle with that feeling of guilt and that persistent feeling of never measuring up. How do you put a price tag on that? Especially when compared with the monetary and the countable, the things of this world, and the things that are unseen. That's what Jesus talks about here. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Store up for yourselves spiritual blessings. Treasures in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy. Thieves do not break in and steal. What about the second part? Ways we store up treasures in heaven. Boy. I think that one's a little bit, it definitely hinges on the concept of what is a treasure in heaven. I'm just going to adjust things here. That a treasure in heaven is the spiritual blessing. And it's something that we know now by faith that we will experience and see fully when we are in heaven. So what are some ways that we store up treasures in heaven? Well, I guess number one, and you could pause for yourself before I give one or two ideas. But the first one might be being familiar with the Word of God and applying that Word of God to our everyday lives, because it's in that collision of what God says with, especially when compared to and when it runs into the pain and suffering of life in this world, that we begin to see the blessings as God has them laid out. In his great mercy, he has given us into a new birth, into a living hope through the resurrection of Jesus Christ from the dead, and into an inheritance that can never perish, spoil, or fade, kept in heaven for you. So the pull of the new self is that God creates a new self in us that focuses on treasures in heaven. This strong pull is motivated by the gospel of Jesus, and this strong pull directs our decision making. That the real you is the Christian you, that the real, the one in charge is the Christian heart, that we aren't animals, driven by our emotions and by what we see with our eyes and feel with our hearts. We are Christian people created by God to do good works, created with a new heart that wants to praise him for the blessings that he's given to us. So talking about lasting treasures and treasures in heaven, a relationship with God. First of all, that Jesus is my priceless treasure. Try putting a price tag on one day in heaven. How much would you pay for one day in heaven? I'm the kind of guy when we go on vacation and, you rent something through Airbnb or VRBO or something like that. And, it's, the price point we'd probably look for is between $80 and $120, for a night. What would be the cost of one day or one sleepover in heaven, one night? Oh my goodness. Now multiply that times eternity, times infinity. So that Jesus is our priceless treasure. Secondly, that your identity, who you are, that you are an heir of heaven, that God has promised you heaven, and that this inheritance was signed by the blood of Jesus and given to you in holy baptism. In your heart, not driven along by guilt and shame or despair, but faith and hope. And your focus, well, it's not about this world. That our life here on earth, 60, 70, 80 years if we have the strength, that our life here on earth is but a tiny little dot, a blip on the screen compared to the eternal timeline of life forever in heaven. So that pull of the new self, that God creates this new self in us that focuses on treasures in heaven. This strong pull is motivated by the gospel of Jesus and directs our decision making. And it's the same three things. Eyes leads to emotion, leads to energy. We fix our eyes on Jesus, and God creates within our hearts this emotion of love and trust and hope. And that really directs our energy in serving our Lord in all that we have, all that we do. And you notice, so the heart in focus, we've got this, and it's in the lower left of your screen if you're following along there. This heart in focus is this constant pull between the old self and the new self, the attention of our eyes, the emotion of the heart, and the energy of our will. And where is that focused? Takes into our video segment, trash or treasure.
Hi, I'm Jeff Davis.
And I'm Dave Kale. Keeping your financial lives in focus is really a challenge today. We prepared a few video segments we hope will help you as you walk through life and work through these sessions to keep your heart in focus.
Have you ever gone rummaging through Grandma's house and found something that looks valuable? How do you really know how much it's worth? I remember once having the opportunity to purchase my grandfather's golden watch. He received it for playing professional baseball. I wish I owned it today. It really would be worth something.
Yes, Jeff, and if we really knew the potential value of things ahead of time, just think how that would change our lives. And as you work through the potential goals that you're going to be identifying, You want to also identify what's really valuable, what the real treasure is for your life. And sometimes those things that we value so much at the moment turn out to be pretty much worthless in the end. Other times, what seems to be so common and sitting around, we find out was really the treasure. So watch Natalie as she discovers what is really valuable or the real treasure that she does have.
Welcome to Trash or Treasure Roadshow, where people come to hear what the experts have to say about their trash or their treasure.
Well, I would say that in this condition at auction, that you could receive 25 or 30.
25 or 30,000?
25 or 30 dollars.
Oh, thanks.
Thank you for sharing.
Can you believe it?
Next. Hi.
I'm Natalie.
Hi, Natalie. Welcome to Trash or Treasure.
Thanks for having me. Saw that your show was coming to town, and I thought that I would bring this in. It's probably nothing.
Well,
You just never know.
no, you never know.
It's nothing.
Well, why don't you let me be the judge of that?
Okay. You're the expert.
Thank you. We'll just take a look at it here.
So what do you think?
Natalie, how long has this been in your personal possession?
All my life. My grandparents gave it to my parents, and my parents gave it to me.
So it's an inheritance then?
I suppose so. I really haven't thought about it much.
Oh, why not?
It just seems that it's old and outdated.
I see.
I couldn't bring myself to throw it out, so I put it on a shelf in the back of my closet.
Ah, where it,
Collected dust.
yes, I see.
I suppose I should have put it on display or something. That is,
That is?
if it's worth anything.
Ah. Well, you'll be happy to learn that what you have here is actually worth a great deal.
Really?
Yes, indeed.
How much?
Well, that depends
It depends on what.
on whether you use it or not.
What do you mean?
Well, it definitely is a treasure, even if it's been sitting on the back shelf of your closet. But if you use it, you'll find that it's priceless.
Priceless? Does that mean I can sell it?
Well, you could share it, but if you use it, well, you'll never want to lose it. Take it with you, Natalie, wherever you go.
Thanks.
Next. Hello. Hi, how are you? Oh, what do we have here?
The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field. When a man found it, he hid it again, and then in his joy went and sold all he had and bought that field.
You'll never want to lose it. Take it with you, Natalie, wherever you go.
Wow, what do you think of that, Jeff? Natalie really made an important discovery. Although she could have known the value of what she had all along if she had been using it and letting it unfold. I just know that we often get a bit confused at what has real lasting value and put our energy in the wrong direction.
There are powerful spiritual forces at work to complicate this, aren't there? What really happens is that our hearts are being pulled. We are attracted to those things of this world and at the same time desire to be identified with Jesus and honor Him with our words and actions. The end result is a conflict, an actual civil war going on in our hearts. This logo demonstrates the pull that is going on. On one hand, our old self pulls us toward things of this world and everything it offers. And on the other, our new self is attracted to things of another world, heaven. We are pulled in both directions. Life is filled with daily choices. Some of those are financial ones. Heart and Focus is a process to help you with that, but it will take some work on your part. We believe God has great things planned for you. So enjoy the journey, and thanks for being with us.
Bottom of page 24, or middle of page 24, talk about getting our heart on track. That first one from Ephesians chapter 3, I pray that out of his glorious riches he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your inner being. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us, to him be the glory. And it really comes down to identifying the two masters that we are serving. And that's the passage on the page or on your screen. No one can serve two masters. He will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. And so that really highlights for us a couple of things. And it's at the bottom of page 24, that every financial decision is, in a sense, a spiritual decision. That financial problems are often the result of poor choices, and that identifying, admitting, and addressing the problem in our life is the key. And finally, if we don't have a plan for our finances, someone else will, because if we don't have that heart in focus properly, then the heart is going to be pulled away to what we see with our eyes, what we feel with our hearts, and the energy that we expend in pursuit of these things is going to pull along with it the money that God has entrusted to us. And that question at the bottom, this one's one of the more uncomfortable questions for each of us to consider. What might your checkbook or credit card bill or calendar suggest are the treasures that you are following? Ooh. And I think that those, the checkbook, credit card bill, calendar, talking not just about the dollars going to different areas, but also the attention and the energy. That's kind of brings in the calendar aspect. When I talk with young couples who are thinking about getting married, or older couples later in life who are getting married, I usually talk about the 3 C's. Talk about the calendar, the clock, and the checkbook, or the checkbook, clock, and calendar, whatever order you want. And the checkbook or the credit card is really talking first about being on the same page in managing finances. And the clock is talking about short-term plans, like what are we doing today or this week or for the next few months. And then the calendar, talking about long-term plans. What do we want to do for over the next few years, over the next couple of decades? When would we like to retire at some point? And what are the blessings, and how do we manage the different blessings that God brings into our life along the way? Where do children fit in this? And a lot of that long-term planning is something that is outside of our current view. But it's something to have in mind. All right, going on to page 25. This talks about, we talked about this. Sorry about that, I missed that. That finances is really related to spiritual decisions, often the result of poor choices. And where we're at is to identify, admit, and address the problem, and then have the plan. And this is, it's not unknown, and if this describes you, you're not the only one, but just a pure, straightforward, yes, this is the actual issue, and this is where we are at, and this is why. And the next page 25, gets on to talking about the plan. And the verse that we have there from Philippians 3, but one thing I do, forgetting what is behind and straining toward what is ahead, I press on toward the goal to win the prize for which God has called me heavenward in Christ Jesus. And the plan kind of has 5 parts there. starts at the top and it goes around in a circle, or goes around in a pentagon, I suppose. Talk about assess where you're at and set some goals, implement it, and make adjustments, or compare and make adjustments as you go along. Compare looking backward and then make adjustments going forward is kind of the image. Compare your progress with that plan. And that's, I mean, it's fairly basic, and there's nothing absolutely, ground shattering here, aside from the fact that we recognize and see the pull of the old self and the pull of the new self, between the pull of our eyes, our energy, and our eyes, our emotion, and our energy, and which way are we going, based on what God has to say. So 5 steps for getting on track. And this is all located in the front part of your book at page 11 and following. Step 1, this is assess your personal financial situation. Where are we now? And this is really identifying your starting point, your present spending habits, your present financial standing. And page 11, there's that personal financial snapshot. Talk about assets, what you own, and liabilities, what you owe. And page 12 is a little sheet on tracking my spending, talking about income and expenses. And with, pull up your bank app from whatever banking service you use, and you could probably take a little bit of time and get some fairly accurate numbers, because it's easy. It would be very easy to be off by 10%, 15% in some of these estimations if we were simply to guess, and that wouldn't be as beneficial, I think. So that's step 1. That's pre-work, or that's pages 11 and 12 in the front part of your workbook. And if you need a copy of that, or you want a PDF of that, or you wrote it in pen and you thought, oh shoot, I should use pencil, just let me know. I've got PDF copies of all of these things, and I can get you a copy that you can, in paper like that, you can fill out and work on your own. Step 2, talking about specific goals. This is page 26 in your workbook. And at this step, we're really clarifying our values. The financial autobiography is pretty fascinating. If you haven't talked about that with your spouse, or if you haven't thought about it for yourself, to think about the household where you grew up and the attitude toward money in that household. Were you always living paycheck to paycheck and getting by on whatever the government provided for assistance, and wondering where the next meal was going to come from? Or by the time you were in the family, was your family fairly well set, and your parents were able to provide a lot of the experiences that maybe other kids didn't have? That autobiography is a fascinating tool, and if nothing else, the numbers in this whole discussion are helpful, but understanding why, the step 2 is really, really fascinating, which is pages 13 and 14, the financial autobiography and my life values. That's pages 13 and 14 in your workbook. And again, if you want more copies of that and revise it or talk about it with your spouse, or with a close friend or confidant, it's sometimes good to chat with somebody that you trust, and just to play with the idea, verbally in conversation. I have walked through this entire course with, I think, 2 different couples, and we spent a lot of time on this, because having an understanding where you come from and what you value, and kind of some clarity to that, can really help a lot of different issues that might arise in a home. And after you look at that life values, just take a moment to not just think about what is the order, but also why. Why do you have that order? Because there are a lot of very good values that one might rank fairly highly, and you're like, wow, I wish I had, like three number twos and number three, and to be able to define those categories as you see fit, and talk about your definition. Like, what do I mean when I say this or that? And then page 15 is, where do you want to end up? Attaching a goal where you look at those values, basically the top values, and say, well, where do we want to be under the Lord's blessing? Where do we want to aim toward? And that's page 15, the personal financial goals worksheet. So here on page 26, at the bottom, you see your top 3 financial goals. And you can be as specific as you want. Maybe it's a short-term goal, like, pay off a particular loan that's been outstanding for a while. Maybe it's a longer-term goal, like pay off the mortgage, or have some money in an emergency fund, or something like that. Or maybe it's a long-term goal, like preparing now for retirement, and that retirement is 30, 40, or 50 years down the line. Or asking that God would allow you to, in a financial goal that isn't necessarily as tied to dollars and cents as it is tied to the emotion of using those dollars that God gives to us. A financial goal that is related to, Lord, give me a heart that says it's okay to go for a couple of months without buying something new, like that Dave Ramsey quote. I love it. He has a very blunt and straightforward way of putting things sometimes, where we spend money we don't have to buy things we don't need to impress people we don't like. It's kind of the way he put it. And maybe your goal is related to that. Maybe I want to stop spending money that I don't have to buy things I don't need. Plain and simple. So take a few moments. You can hit pause on the video or in the podcast and list a few of those for us or for yourself. This is as personal as you want it to be. No need to share it with anybody. Although if you are married or contemplating marriage, obviously my encouragement is to talk about it with that person. Going ahead to page 27. My personal goals, we talked about that. Implement your spending plan. How do we get there? Put together the details to reach your financial goals. And for this one, this is way at the back of your workbook, at the very back, and I can get you copies of all this. At the back of your workbook, we've got an appendix with a number of different forms and websites, and some ideas, and there are some extra things that have come about in the last decade or so. But at the back, you've got kind of a spending plan outline, and I encourage you to check that out. What are the benefits? And provides you some hard facts, maybe increases communication. Definitely, you get it out in the open there. Helps develop some self-control, where you say, here's an objective thing, and fill in the blank. Maybe provide some steps to reach your financial goals, where if you look at the data that you've compiled from the beginning of the book and you say, wow, we're still paying $80 a month for cable in the year 2020. There might be some hot spots where you say, well, that is really out of proportion to what we need. Personally, and I've said this in multiple different venues now, personally, one of the best things that our family did was pretty much get rid of our TV. And that's not for everybody. But the interesting part wasn't getting rid of the TV, but cutting out that major stream of advertising in our home. And just the change that we noticed in ourselves between discontentment to being content with what we have, and the change that we noticed in our children between what they would be asking for and what they would be busy doing. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm getting out in the weeds a little bit. Some of the benefits are listed for you there. And why is that spending plan needed? Well, You need something on your side to help combat the strong force of consumer marketing. There are companies that spend millions of dollars, many, many companies spending millions of dollars figuring out how to sell more to you. And it's good to have something, that we can see with our eyes to help direct our eyes and our emotions so that they aren't led astray by manipulative marketing, so that our energy is pointed in the right place. Can address the challenge of multiple spending habits. Maybe if you have two people in your household, and one person always packs a lunch, but then goes out for drinks after work, and the other person usually doesn't pack a lunch and goes out at lunchtime. Or maybe you come from families that had very different financial values and attached strong emotions. Here's the important part: attached different strong emotions to the use of money in that household. To be able to have it on paper and say, here are some constraints, and it gives you something to talk to. Not that it has so much power inherently as a kind of a paper fence, so to speak. I know anyway, not that it has so much strength as a paper commitment, but that it gives you the ability to have things clear and to be able to talk about them when things line up or don't line up. And the spending plan is one of the most effective tools for wise money management. Spending plan, household budget. Budget sounds so boring, but spending plan is, because that's a verb or that's a participle. How do we spend the money that God gives to us each week or each month? The success of the spending plan is found in making wise daily choices. That the minutes make the hours, make the days, make the months, make the years, and even the minute decisions on a small scale can have long-term impacts when you add all those up. And so we keep in mind this contrast between the pull of the old self and the pull of the new self. The old self is a strong inner pull that naturally lives for its own satisfaction. Its cravings for treasures on earth lead us to make wrong choices. Period. and I think anybody who's been on your own for a while and had to manage things on your own for a while, you could say, yeah, I see that, I recognize that, I know that for myself. But the pull of the new self, that God creates a new self in us that focuses on treasures in heaven. This strong pull is motivated by the gospel of Jesus and directs our decision making. And Paul tells us here at the bottom, so I tell you this and insist on it in the Lord, that you must no longer live as the Gentiles do in the futility of their thinking, but put off the old self, which is being corrupted by its deceitful desires, to be made new in the attitude of your minds, and to put on the new self, created to be like God in true righteousness and holiness. That's from Ephesians chapter 4. Page 28. We see a contrast between the pull of the old self. Didn't quite line up here, but the old self, takes the income and says spending, number one, basic care, lifestyle. Maybe number two, pays down debt. If there's anything left, probably not to save or to give. And to the pull of the new self, that goes away. This animation is beautifully 2008 if you're following along. The pull of the new self, I think. Here we go. I guess it was all timed out. So the new self really switches. It turns things upside down. Income, the number one question is giving, and then taking care of the basics, and then saving, and then spending, and then the lifestyle comes last instead of first. And so step 4, compare and adjust. Compare your progress and adjust the plan. How will you stay on track? At this step, you will design ways to monitor your steps and maintain your progress. First of all, you focus on your God-honoring financial visions and goals. And then you manage yourself and your spending. And then you follow your plan. That means you have to track it and compare results. Especially if this is new for you or you've tried it in the past, we can make a bunch of copies of that spending plan, and you can adjust it and track your spending as you go from month to month, and how compare looking backward and adjust looking forward. Pay attention to the little things, especially this is a big one. The little things. There's a reason why nearly every organization that you will interact with that provides a service or a product, they'll be looking to get you on a subscription, because $1.99 or $2.99 a month, or $7.99 or $8.99, that sounds like such a small amount, and it might be. But that amount compounded over time, if they said, instead of $9 a month, well, it's actually going to be, $100, $120 a year. That would be something else entirely. And so the subscription idea is one of those little things that we pay attention to. And we, personally, I would, in as many cases as possible, I would rather pay for an app one time that I'm actually going to use, and rather than having to pay every month or every year based on the expenses. But you have to evaluate that for yourself. Monitor the progress, especially a debt reduction plan. Number one step in reducing debt is don't add any more. and then start whittling away at it. And that's one of the other lessons that we'll have later this month or early next month of how do you deal with debt, and monitor the progress of your investment. Get rid of the negative and adding to the positive. And then finally, the accountability partner. Work with your spouse if you're married, or find some other close friend or confidant. And there was one case where somebody talked to their pastor. They didn't have anybody else, and they had a serious problem that they were worried about. And they said, Pastor Hagen, I need to find a way to make this stop. Will you check up on me, every month? And we did that for a couple of months to get things straightened out until that person was on a better footing and had a better approach to these things. Step 5. Let me know if there are any questions, or feel free to comment if you're watching on Facebook, or to text me, Pastor Hagen, or contact me. If you're watching on YouTube, that's in the notes below the video, or if you're listening on the podcast, that's in the show notes. You can contact me there. Step 5. This is the last part. Commit to being a lifelong learner, because there's always more to learn, and it kind of keeps us sharp. This is page 29 in your student workbook. So when are you finished? Well, after you got that financial plan, and you're making progress, and you're adjusting and comparing, looking backward, and adjusting, looking forward, you might think that, hey, I'm done. But it's good, because every year there's a little bit of new information, or there are new adjustments to the tax code, or new adjustments to the laws of our land that might throw a wrench in what we do, or maybe new economic challenges or opportunities that might be coming our way, and others with professional financial experience. I'm a pastor, and I'm teaching this, and we're going with the basics of, and approaching it from a spiritual perspective. But if you would like, or if you are in need of something more depth, I can point you to a couple of different people locally or in other parts of the country who would be able to be more well-versed in some of these areas. And some of the areas, maybe related to taxes or investments, maybe related to planning, if you're working on estate planning or that sort of a thing. But Solomon talked about that. I think that's on your page here. Of what use is money in the hand of a fool, since he has no desire to get wisdom? From Proverbs chapter 17, verse 16. This commitment to being a lifelong learner, that what God has to say here about our finances is definitely a spiritual question, because it gets to the heart of the matter, is the pull of the old self and the pull of the new self. And you can't separate the pull of the old and the new from the reality of what God has given to us. So 6 ways to use our finances. Number 1 through 6: earn, give, save, borrow, spend, and entrust. And that's the basic order that we want to have in mind. That God gives us money through whichever way He's provided for us to earn it, whatever godly vocation you have, to give, to save, to prepare for a rainy day or the next day or the future, maybe to borrow, such as in a responsible way, like borrowing for a house or something like that, to spend to cover our basic needs, to spend in the case of lifestyle enhancements, and to entrust that to somebody who would take care of it and use it wisely, even after we are gone. So the goal of this Heart and Focus course is to help you become faithful in managing what God has given and discover the joy in living for Jesus. Talking about a spiritual goal in the way we use our material possessions. So finally, your heart is in focus. Focus. Number 1, this was tonight's lesson. Fix your eyes on lasting treasure. Financial goal setting for the disciple of Jesus. Session 2, next time, we'll talk about overcoming worry. And the 3 ideas there talk about earning diligently and giving generously and saving wisely. Session 3 would be conquering obstacles, such as borrowing cautiously. I think we talk about debt in that one as well. Session 4, using God's money wisely, how we spend responsibly. Session 5, shifting our priorities, entrusting this wealth faithfully. And then session 6 is kind of the wrap up, keeping our focus, with a review on all of that. So our review from tonight. Take a moment, you can jot it down for yourself and for you to review at a later date. And maybe we'll review it at the start of our next week's lesson. What new insights did you learn in this session that you want to incorporate? Or what helpful experiences that you could share with somebody else? And if you jot it down now, take a moment, you can hit pause if you need to and jot it down and think for yourself, what new insight did I learn tonight that I could incorporate into my approach for tomorrow? And then the other part, encouragement and accountability. And this, we'll talk about this a little bit next time as well. What successes can we report, or what struggles are you having, and how can we help? And again, if you want to talk about that personally, individually, or privately, you can talk to me, Pastor Hagen, and there are a number of experts that live in the area here that I could direct you to as well, who would be able to give you more in-depth advice, especially from somebody who's got the certificates for having studied some of these things. So action plan from this session, main action items. We talked about all of those steps. You might, if you haven't gone through the beginning part of this book, verse pages 11 through 15 or 16, and that after you've worked through those, then that naturally leads to that spending plan in the appendix, page 127 or so, and put a date on that, put a number on it. So in summary, fixing our eyes on lasting treasure is really one thing. Your relationship with God, we could read this together. My relationship with God, Jesus is my priceless treasure, my identity. I am an heir of heaven. My heart, faith and hope. Your focus, it's not about this world. The focus perspective, that's what we have right here. So in summary, in a way, our world resembles a department store window in which a practical joker has been at work switching price tags around. The most valuable merchandise carries the lowest price tags, and the cheapest trash is valued most highly. Life is often a pursuit of what we think is most valuable. When we finally get our hands on it, we often discover it does not bring the happiness that it promised. What at first looked like a treasure soon loses its value or disappears completely. Instead of giving us the peace we wanted, we become more discontented, and life has a void that things can't fill. But there is something that can fill that void. It provides a far greater value than the things of this world. It is the kingdom of heaven. It goes far beyond anything that can be seen or experienced in this lifetime. Its value centers on a confident and lasting relationship with God and provides new meaning for this life. That was made possible because Jesus set aside his riches to become poor for our sake, giving up his own life so we could have eternal riches. The daily challenge lies in our hearts. The old self leads us to chase the wrong treasure, but God creates a new nature in people that reorients their perspective and approach to life. This comes from the transforming message of Jesus, gets our hearts in focus, and provides the power to meet the challenges of each day. If you don't know much about this Jesus, please talk to me, and I've got a book that I can share with you, and I'd love to chat with you more about him. You can read about his life story in the Bible. We'll close with prayer. Lord, forgive me for focusing my heart on the wrong things and letting them become false gods in my heart. As I approach the rest of this day and this week and this month, help me to recognize the tempting messages of this world that get me off track. Throughout my days, train me to fix my eyes on Jesus and heavenly treasure. Do not let me become short-circuited by short-term desires that have no lasting value. Help me to keep my heart focused on greater goals. Let my choices reflect the lasting treasure that you have promised for my future. Amen. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. This was session 1. We'll continue next week with session 2, Overcoming Worry.